Hello everyone! It's time to go over what else I saw in September that I haven't yet talked about. Are you ready? Movie number 1 is 1960's Pay or Die, a turn-of-the-century mafia film/biopic that stars Ernest Borgnine as the sole Italian policeman in Little Italy and the only guy willing to stand up to a secret society of bullies that calls itself the Black Hand. It's a very good film that explores the lieutenant's crusade against the creeps terrorizing his neighborhood, as well as his efforts to become a captain on the force. Once again, Borgnine proves himself as a leading man, an admirable figure with a tough guy exterior but a sensitive soul. He handles dramatic, touching moments and action scenes with equal deftness. Considering this is the early 60s, I was a little surprised by some of the more violent content, but the film is extremely effective in showing how sick and ruthless the bad guys are, therefore justifying the protagonist's fiery determination to put them behind bars. While most of the actors were unfamiliar to me, they all did a fine job, especially Zora Lampert, and I enjoyed the story and cast a lot. The fact I'd never come across this title before makes me wonder if it's not as well known as it should be. Movie number 2 is 1942's Berlin Correspondent. This compact pre-war thriller stars Dana Andrews as an American journalist living in Germany who turns the propaganda-laden reports he's being forced to read on the radio into coded messages. But the SS are onto him and set a trap to uncover the source of his top-secret information. This was surprisingly good, considering it's a modest effort attempting to convey what the Nazis were up to at a time when such facts were not as widely known. It's a treat to see Dana Andrews in an early lead role, playing a light, even somewhat jocular personality. He was on the cusp of stardom here, and this makes a nice change from the tough, troubled film noir image he would cultivate in just a couple years. I did think the film lost some momentum in its latter section, but it had a compelling story alongside some entertaining espionage escapades. Movie number 3 is another World War II flick, 1943's The Cross of Lorraine. It's a prisoner-of-war film that follows a group of French soldiers taken captive after France surrenders to Germany. The cast does include some Americans. Most conspicuous is Gene Kelly as a reckless hothead, but it's Jean-Pierre Aumont who stars as a lawyer-turned-soldier who stands back and observes, using his wits to figure out how to survive and perhaps strike back at the enemy. Jean-Pierre Aumont is an interesting person to learn about. He stayed in his native France until the last possible minute, fleeing the Nazis in '42. He came to Hollywood and stayed there just long enough to make this movie, and then he went right back and joined the Free French Forces, with whom he fought in North Africa, Italy, and France. He was twice wounded and earned 2 medals for his distinguished service. And then when the war was over, he went back to acting. The strong supporting cast also includes Hume Cronin as an opportunist despised for his willingness to cooperate, Cedric Hardwicke as an imprisoned priest, and Peter Lorre as a sadistic camp officer. You know that Lorre, who also fled Nazi rule, hated putting on that uniform, but perhaps the role appealed to him as a chance to demonstrate how cruel and apathetic the Nazis could be. Overall, I did enjoy the film. There are POW camp films with stronger ensembles that I've liked more, but it was very good despite a certain smallness to its scale. And for a 40s film, it's got some surprising bouts of violence. Nothing major, it's kind of like Pay or Die. No blood, no guts, but startling relative to the time when it was made. Movie number 4 is a viewer recommendation, 2014's The Age of Adaline. This blend of romance and fantasy stars Blake Lively as a woman born in 1908 who stops aging after a freak accident. Perpetually 29 years old, she goes through each decade avoiding attachments and changing identities to keep her secret. The film is presented kind of like a documentary, with a narrator guiding us through the highlights of her life. It's a clever approach, though at times I felt it created a buffer between the audience and what was happening on screen. One thing I especially liked was that Adaline's style is a patchwork of the eras she's experienced. She maintains her retro tastes, though the bulk of the action occurs in 2014. I also appreciated how Lively plays the character as someone who's able to fit in, but never quite blends in. While she changes with the times, there's this classic quality to her walk and her manners. The way she talks is clear, more correct, and a little old-fashioned. It can be a melancholy film, given that Adaline's had a lifetime and a half of heartbreak and her stolen moments of happiness have been fleeting. While the story is not terribly confusing, there are some elements that are just plain strange to consider. The scenes with Ellen Burstyn as her daughter are especially good. The two actresses have a lovely dynamic, and you feel that, despite appearances, Lively really is her mother. Scenes with Harrison Ford were interesting as well. It was a more emotional performance from him than I was expecting. And the guy who played him as a young man, Anthony Ingruber, was very well cast. He did an incredible job with the micro-expressions, the voice, gestures, mannerisms. I just looked him up. Turns out he's an impressionist. No wonder he was so good. The whole concept here is thought-provoking. I did find the ending a little predictable and pat, but at the same time, I was happy it resolved the way it did. Movie number 5 is 1960's Intimidation, a Japanese thriller directed by Koreyoshi Kurihara that I happened to learn about while working on my review of M. In this stylish, noirish film about deception, trickery, and betrayal, an ambitious bank manager finds himself being blackmailed into robbing his own bank. I wondered at first if this might have anything in common with the excellent 1961 crime drama Cash on Demand, which stars Peter Cushing and Andre Morel, but it really doesn't. The film is very well made, with engaging photography and fluid camera movement that craftily directs the viewer's attention. There is a strong emphasis on eyes, with lots of sweaty close-ups in high-tension moments. I just didn't like the movie that much. The story is kind of sordid with a dearth of likable characters, and I realize that's kind of the point. No one in the world Kurihara depicts here is truly trustworthy or honest. Everyone looks after their own interests. I perceived the influence of both the film noir movement and the new wave movement, and neither one is known for having a warm, fuzzy, optimistic view of society. Movie number 6 is a viewer recommendation, 2011's United. This combination plane crash and sports movie tells the true story of the 1958 Munich air disaster involving members of the Manchester United Football Club's star team. Despite the fact I'm not big on sports, and I know nothing about Manchester United except that it's one of the most beloved soccer teams in the world, I really enjoyed this British TV movie. David Tennant is great as the coach who has a tight bond with his players. Also featured are Jack O'Connell as an ambitious new team member, Sam Claflin as the buddy he looks up to, and Dougray Scott as the somewhat enigmatic team manager. The incident itself isn't so much the focus. This isn't a special effects heavy thing, it's not a survival movie, but the disaster is the crux of the narrative. It's a tragic story, but ultimately inspiring as we get to know the characters leading up to this life-changing event, and then delve into the repercussions as the survivors struggle to decide what to do next. Movie number 7 was 1967's Yongary, Monster from the Deep, a Korean-Japanese co-production that was Korea's first foray into the world of giant rubber-suited monsters. This was recommended to me a few years ago. I had been planning to review it for months, finally scheduled it for September 23rd, watched it, and was in the process of writing my review when suddenly I canceled the whole thing. What I watched was a badly cropped, so-called unofficial DVD release from 2004. The quality was terrible, and if I had reviewed the movie, I probably would have spent a lot of time talking about that. However, I discovered there have since been 2 releases of a remastered widescreen print, which takes care of the horrendous crop job. This cropping was so bad. I've seen pan and scan movies before, but the dubbing was already awful. But sometimes the person speaking had been cropped out of the picture, so it was like, who's talking? I don't see anyone's mouth moving. What is going on? It was bad. Considering this new information, I decided not to go ahead and review what I saw, which was like a copy of an old VHS tape. To go ahead wouldn't be fair to the film, or to its fans, or to you guys, because my comments wouldn't be an accurate reflection of the true film that is now finally available, which I will review someday. As you can imagine, this was very disappointing and frustrating, and once again I had to scramble to come up with something else to talk about. But the upside is that instead you got a review of Robot Monster, so it wasn't all bad, right? Movie number 8 is one that has been recommended to me by a few people in the past. I was supposed to watch it last month, didn't make it. It's 1987's The Whales of August. Screen legends Lillian Gish and Bette Davis star together as elderly sisters living in Gish's home on an island off the coast of Maine. Gish bustles around doing housework and looking after her blind, pessimistic sister. The film also stars Vincent Price, Ann Sothern, and Harry Carey Jr., and it's ideal casting all around. Gish still has that understated quality that made her a silent film superstar, proving how mistaken people are who say no one knew how to act in silent movies, while Davis is the perfect person to play her bitter, peevish sister. It's funny that they come across here as opposite personalities. Davis seems like the autocratic foil to Gish's sweet-tempered old lady, yet in reality, Gish and Davis were equally formidable women. Lesser-known classic star Ann Sothern doesn't get as much attention, but she's also excellent, especially in her final scene. Vincent Price sparkles as a gallant but impoverished refugee of Russian nobility whose friendly overtures cause a blip in the status quo, and Harry Carey Jr. is awesome as the comic relief, playing a noisy handyman who pops by to help the ladies around the house. I thought he did great with the accent. The film does explore bittersweet, even gloomy topics, but it doesn't end up being a depressing movie. It's a stirring drama that is frank about its characters and their situations, and it keeps its own pace. It's not slow or dull, but it is quiet, stately, and calm. And while Gish and Davis refuse to acknowledge that their working together held any significance, it was a big deal. Movie number 9 was a rewatch of 2016's Train to Busan, the Korean horror thriller in which a divorced workaholic father is escorting his little girl to visit her mother in Busan via bullet train when extreme violence starts spreading across the country. I really liked this take on the zombie apocalypse the first time I saw it. I've put a link to my first mini-review in the description for anyone who's interested, although there's a very good chance that I just say the same things that I'm going to say here. I thought the movie was just as good the second time. It doesn't go too hard with the gore, but the zombies are still freaky. They turn astonishingly fast and have jerky, contortionist-like movements that are alarming. An isolated setting like this is always a good place to stage this sort of thing, allowing the virus to spread like wildfire and limiting the characters' means of escaping or fighting back. There are a couple shots that are over the top, where the zombies run and pile up on each other in a way that's pretty comical, but it's an engaging film, intense, constantly moving, with good music. And I think its biggest strengths are the compelling story and the characters. Often in movies like this, you have a bunch of people you don't really care about. They're usually kind of annoying, and you don't know anything about them, so when they become monster fodder and die, it's like, okay, whatever, there goes another one. But these characters are well acted and developed enough that you become attached to them on some level, so when something happens to one of them, you feel it more deeply. I don't go to a zombie movie looking for an emotional story, but with Train to Busan, you get one. It's moved me to the brink of tears both times I've seen it. Movie number 10 is 1948's Yellow Sky, a western in which Gregory Peck and Richard Widmark are members of a band of bank robbers who cross paths with the sole residents of a ghost town, fierce and feisty Anne Baxter and her grandfather. This was a viewer recommendation, though I didn't realize that when the movie randomly popped up for me on YouTube. The problem is that I watched the colorized version. I always screen the first couple minutes of a movie I find on YouTube to make sure the quality is okay, the audio's in sync, and so on. And when I saw the main titles, I thought, oh wow, it's in color and it looks great. Well, we sat down to watch the movie a little while later, my parents and I, and as soon as the first scene started playing, I said, wait a minute, is this colorized? And I should have paused the movie, looked it up, and then searched for the original black and white version. There is an upload of that on YouTube. This would have taken me about 2 minutes and saved me 98 minutes of aggravation and regret. I hate colorizations, and I've got to be honest, there have been a few times recently that I've received comments from people saying, hey, I liked your review and was inspired to check out this movie, so I watched the colorized version. I find that so disappointing and discouraging. I have very strong feelings on this subject. I don't understand why someone would pass over the original black and white film and go for the color conversion, where you have to know that whoever was doing the colorization, whatever, was just guessing about the colors of things like clothing, cars, hair, skin tones. If you go for the colorization because for some reason you find black and white unrealistic, unrelatable, unwatchable, well, I don't get that because I love black and white, but it's not like the colorizations solve that problem. I find most, if not all of them, have an unnatural, mottled clay look about them and a depressing lack of depth and richness. Colorization can be done well, but it seldom adds anything, and if it's done poorly, it can turn a masterpiece into an abomination. This may be the worst I've ever seen. It's appalling. It's patchy and inconsistent, with spots where you can tell the black and white is fighting to come through. Sometimes a character's face is colorized with that bland, peachy hue, but their hair is blinking in and out, and their hands, or some other exposed skin, but especially their hands, turn this freaky blue-gray. It's disgusting. It's absolute garbage. I think it's a shame that over 1 million people have tuned into that video and formed an opinion on this movie based on that version. As it is, this is another film I don't think I can fairly review right now. I didn't care for most of the characters or the emphasis on the gang of horn dogs competing for the one special girl. I'm just not fond of that kind of plot. But I think it more than likely that the gross colorization, which also, by the way, bothered my eyes, put me in a bad mood from the get-go. So I don't know how much my negative response has to do with the movie itself versus how much I hated how it looked, which, again, is not how it's supposed to look. Please, people, I'm begging you, don't watch colorizations. Movie number 11 is 1981's Roar. Often hailed as the most dangerous movie ever made, this was a passion project that took 11 years to make. Noel Marshall and then-wife Tippi Hedren sought to showcase the power and majesty of big cats, so they made this movie a family affair that stars Marshall and Hedren along with her daughter Melanie Griffith and his sons. They had the best of intentions, and they were very proud of the fact that no animals were harmed in the making of this film. But at least 70 members of the cast and crew were. The loose plot of this notorious film has Marshall playing a naturalist living in Africa to study big cats. After a long separation, his wife and kids come to stay with him, but upon arrival they find the house overrun with lions, tigers, panthers, leopards, and so on. There's also a very strong elephant nearby. The whole production was a colossal nightmare. The making of is as fascinating as the film itself, and if the purpose was to show the world that we could cohabitate with lions and tigers, etc., it was an epic failure, at least in my opinion. This movie is terrifying, especially because you know it's real. People were mauled and seriously injured making this movie. Some of that made it into the film, which makes it deeply unsettling to witness these people running around and having wild animals all over them and in their faces, knowing that much of it was not staged. I felt more stressed out watching this than I have some horror movies. Noel Marshall, who by all accounts was quite eccentric, was the producer and the writer and director and the star. He's not really an actor, so I get the impression he was more or less playing himself, and it's hard to decide if he's insane or just dangerously naive, severely underestimating the unpredictability of these wild animals. He did have experience working with big cats, and after the film was finished, he and Hedren ended up creating a preserve and sanctuary where these animals could live, and she still runs it to this day. But, it sure seems in a couple spots like he doesn't really know what he's doing. The prolonged production was plagued with trouble, and it's amazing that nobody died. It's also impressive that they managed to assemble a cohesive story with just a few glaring continuity errors out of all the footage that was shot across 5 years. The camera work is very impressive as well. Mad props to those guys who dared to get up close and personal, including director of photography Jan de Bont, who nearly had his scalp torn off. It is astonishing that they were able to complete this thing, and I respect the dedication. But, oh man, was this nuts. So here I am the next day. I forgot to film the end of the video. That's what else I saw in September, or at least what I saw up to Wednesday the 27th. I'm cutting things off early this time so that I can get this video edited and posted for Saturday. And then I'm going to switch things up for October. Instead of doing 4 solo reviews focusing on one film apiece, I'm going to post a set of mini reviews each week. It's basically going to be like what else I saw in October, but broken up by week, instead of one massive video coming at the end of the month, or rather the beginning of the next month. There are a few reasons why I'm doing this, but the biggest one is that I have a lot of movies I've been saving up to watch during spooky season, and I realized recently that if I spend the usual amount of time working on solo reviews, I'll only get to watch a handful of them. And the person who would be most disappointed by that is my mom. And that is not acceptable. So for October only, I'm dispensing with the usual format. We're going to watch more movies, and you're going to get more reviews. They're just going to be shorter, more compact. We'll see how it goes. I hope you enjoyed these mini reviews. A list of the films and how I watched them can be found in the description. Let me know your thoughts on any of the movies I mentioned in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.